The obsidian rotunda floated in the cold darkness around a dead star. No light came from the star anymore. It had burned out millions of years ago, and now it was just a dark ball of iron and silence. But the beings who met here did not need light. They were old. They were powerful. They had seen stars born and die like fireflies in the night. The Endurance Council had 12 members. Each one came from a different species. Each species had lived for millions of years. They had watched young civilizations rise up from mud and water. They had watched those same civilizations grow old and turn to dust. Nothing surprised them anymore. They had seen everything, or so they thought. High Arbiter Valkan stood at the center of the great round chamber. Valkan was not made of flesh and blood like most living things. Valkan was made of crystal. Light moved through the Arbiter's body, like thoughts moving through a mind. The Arbiter had lived for 200,000 years. In all that time, Valkan had never felt fear. Until now. The holographic display in the center of the chamber showed the galaxy. Billions of stars. Trillions of worlds. Countless lives living and dreaming and hoping. And at the edge of the display, there was darkness. Not the normal darkness of empty space. This was something else. Something wrong. The void tide. It had started at the edge of the galaxy 300 years ago. At first, the Council thought it was just a strange phenomenon. A scientific curiosity. They sent ships to study it. The ships never came back. They sent more ships with better shields and stronger weapons. Those ships also never came back. Then they understood. The void tide was not something that could be fought. It was not an enemy with ships and soldiers. It was the end of everything. Where the tide passed, reality itself stopped existing. Stars did not explode. They simply disappeared. Planets did not burn. They just stopped being real. Everything the tide touched became nothing. Not even dust remained, and it was spreading. Slowly but surely, it was eating the galaxy from the outside, and the Council's greatest scientists had studied the tide for 200 years. They had run calculations on computers the size of moons. They had consulted ancient databases from civilizations that had died before most current species were born. The answer was always the same. There was no way to stop it. There was no way to escape it. There was no way to survive it. The void tide would reach the core worlds in 11 cycles. That was about 18 months in human time. 80 months, and then everything would be gone. Valkan looked at the other council members. The Morath delegation sat in their water tanks, their tentacles moving slowly with grief. The crystalline architects flickered with dim light, already preparing to seal themselves away in frozen time. The representatives of the hegemony of suns stood tall and proud, but their eyes showed the truth. They were afraid too. "We have reached the end," Valkan said. The Arbiter's voice was like wind chimes in a storm. "There is nothing more we can do. We must tell the galaxy." No one argued. What was there to argue about? The message went out across every channel, every frequency. Every world that had a receiver heard the words of the Endurance Council. The message was translated into 10,000 languages. It reached farming colonies on distant moons. It reached great cities on ancient worlds. It reached ships traveling between the stars. Brace for the worst. That was the message. Not a call to fight. Not a plan for survival. Just a gentle suggestion to prepare for the end. To make peace. To say goodbye. Across the galaxy, different species reacted in different ways. The Morath began their final songs. These were ancient melodies that their people sang when death was certain. The songs were beautiful and sad, and they would continue until the tide took them. The crystalline architects sealed themselves in temporal stasis. They would freeze themselves in a single moment of time, hoping that somehow they might outlast the destruction. The hegemony of suns gathered their war fleet and flew directly into the tide. They preferred to die fighting, even if there was nothing to fight. Billions of beings across thousands of worlds looked up at their skies and cried. Trillions made peace with their gods. Parents held their children close and tried to find the words to explain that everything was ending on a small blue world called Earth. In a cramped laboratory on the moon, a woman named Yara Chun heard the announcement. Yara was 43 years old. She had brown skin and black hair that was starting to show gray at the edges. She wore glasses because she had never bothered to get her eyes fixed. She had a bad knee from a climbing accident when she was younger. She had not spoken to her sister in 6 years because of a stupid argument that neither of them could remember anymore. She was a physicist. Not a famous one. Not a particularly important one. She worked on theoretical problems that most people could not understand and did not care about. She was currently 2 weeks late on a grant proposal for funding that would now never come. She listened to the translation of the arbiter's words. She read the scientific data that came with the announcement. She looked at the numbers that said the void tide could not be stopped. For a long moment, she sat very still. Then she pulled up her research files on her computer. She had been working on something called quantum-locked boundary membranes. It was purely theoretical, no practical application. Just an interesting puzzle that she liked to think about when she could not sleep. She looked at the equations. She looked at the data about the void tide. She thought about entropy and energy and the fundamental nature of reality. Then she cracked her knuckles and leaned forward in her chair. Okay, she said to herself. 11 cycles. That's about 80 months. I can work with that. Outside her window, the earth hung in the black sky like a blue marble. 7 billion people lived on that marble. Most of them were crying or praying or holding their loved ones. Most of them had already given up. But Yara Chun was not most people. She did not know how to give up. It was not stubbornness exactly. It was not bravery. It was just that her brain did not work that way. When someone told her something was impossible, her first thought was always the same. Are you sure? She started typing. She had 18 months to save the galaxy. She did not have time to waste on crying. Humanity was young. That was the first thing every other species noticed about them. The Endurance Council had members who remembered when humans were still living in caves and hunting with pointed sticks. In galactic terms, humans had only just learned to walk. 87 years. That was how long humans had been part of the galactic community. 87 years since they had built their first ship that could travel faster than light. 87 years since they had met their first alien species and said hello instead of running away screaming. 87 years was nothing. It was a blink. It was a single breath in the long life of the galaxy. Humans had no seat on the Endurance Council. They had no ancient wisdom passed down through millions of years. They had no secret technologies hidden in vaults beneath their cities. They were children playing in a room full of adults. But children do not always know what is impossible. And sometimes that is exactly what makes them dangerous. Yara-chan worked for 3 weeks without stopping. She ate at her desk. She slept in short bursts on the small cot in the corner of her lab. She drank so much coffee that her hands started to shake and would not stop. Her idea was simple. Well, it was simple to explain. Actually doing it would be something else entirely. The void tide was entropy. It was the universe falling apart, unraveling like a sweater when you pull on a loose thread. You could not stop entropy. That was basic physics. Everything falls apart eventually. Everything ends. But what if you could feed the entropy something else? Yara imagined the void tide as a hungry animal. It ate reality. It consumed existence itself. You could not build a wall to stop it because it would just eat the wall. You could not run from it because it was everywhere and nowhere at once. But what if you gave it something to eat? Something designed to be eaten. Something that would keep it busy while everything else escaped. She called it the scab protocol. Like the scab that forms over a wound. The scab is not the skin. The scab is sacrificed so the skin underneath can heal. Her plan was to create an artificial layer of reality at the edge of the void tide. This layer would be made of quantum foam, the smallest possible pieces of existence. It would be dense and rich with information. It would be delicious to the tide. The tide would eat the artificial layer instead of the real universe. And while it was eating, the real universe would be safe. At least for a while. At least long enough to find a better solution. She wrote up her theory. She checked her math 17 times. Then she sent it to the Galactic Scientific Consortium. The rejections started coming within minutes. 4,127 scientists from across the galaxy read her proposal and said no. Some were polite. They called her idea creative and imaginative, and unfortunately not grounded in established physics. Some were not polite. They called her idea childish and embarrassing, and a waste of everyone's time. One Morath physicist, a being with 17 tentacles and 3 brains, sent her a sound file. When she played it, she heard a wet bubbling noise. She later learned that this was how Morath laughed when they thought something was very, very stupid. Yara read every rejection. She saved them all in a folder on her computer. Then she went back to work. If the galaxy would not help her, she would ask humanity. The United Earth Coalition was not a powerful government. It controlled one solar system and a few dozen colonies scattered across nearby stars. Its military was small. Its economy was modest. In the grand scale of galactic civilization, it barely mattered. But the United Earth Coalition was facing extinction. And when humans face extinction, they do strange things. Yara presented her idea to the Coalition Council. She showed them her equations. She explained her theory. She told them the truth. She did not know if it would work. The odds were very bad. Every scientist in the galaxy thought she was wrong. But the alternative was to do nothing. The alternative was to wait for the end. The council voted. The decision was unanimous. "We have nothing to lose," said the coalition president. "Let's try." The order went out to every human world. Every mining operation. Every factory. Every research station. Everything humanity had would now serve one purpose: the building the scab. Ships that had been carrying tourists now carried raw materials. Factories that had been making consumer goods now made quantum foam generators. Scientists who had been studying distant stars now studied Yara's equations. The other species watched with confusion. What were the humans doing? Did they not understand that the tide could not be stopped? Did they not realize they were wasting their final months on a fantasy? Some species felt pity. The poor humans. They were too young to understand. They had not yet learned to accept the inevitable. They would learn, in time. They would give up eventually. Some species felt annoyance. The humans were making noise. They were disrupting the peaceful acceptance of the end. Why could they not just be quiet and die with dignity like everyone else? But some species felt something else. Something they had not felt in a very long time. They felt curious. On the mining moon of Europa, human workers dug into the ice with machines that ran 24 hours a day. On the shipyards of Mars, engineers built generators that had never been built before. On Earth itself, universities emptied as every student and professor joined the great project. They worked 18-hour days. They worked 20-hour days. They took stimulants to stay awake and worked even longer. They made mistakes and fixed them. They argued about the best designs and then tested them all. Yara Chun did not sleep. She could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the numbers. 80 months. 17 months. 16 months. Her hands shook constantly now. Her eyes were red from staring at screens. She had lost 15 pounds because she kept forgetting to eat, but she did not stop. She could not stop, because stopping meant accepting that the galaxy was going to die. And she refused to accept that thought when someone told her that her plan was impossible. She always gave the same answer. Maybe, but we're going to try anyway. That was the human way. It always had been. When the odds were bad, humans did not give up. They worked harder. When everyone said something could not be done, humans tried to do it anyway. It was not always smart. It was not always rational. But it was who they were. And now, with the end of everything approaching like a dark wave, humanity was going to show the galaxy what that meant. 8 months had passed since the announcement. 8 months of work. 8 months of fear and hope and exhaustion. The first quantum foam generator was ready. It was an ugly thing. A massive machine the size of a small moon, covered in cables and antennas and glowing panels. It had been built in record time by workers who had not taken a single day off. Many of them had collapsed from exhaustion and been carried away, only to return to work as soon as they could stand. The generator was deployed at the edge of Sector 7 Gamma. This was a region of space that had already been evacuated. The void tide was close here. Through telescopes, scientists could see the darkness approaching. Stars that had shone for billions of years were blinking out one by one, like candles being snuffed. Yara-Chun watched from the command center on Luna Base. Her team was gathered around her. They had worked together for 8 months. They knew each other better than they knew their own families now. They had argued and fought and made up and argued again. But they had never stopped working. "Activate the generator," Yara said. The command was sent across the vast distance of space. The generator hummed to life. Quantum foam began to form around it, creating a thin membrane of artificial reality. For exactly 4 seconds, everything seemed to work. Then the membrane destabilized. The quantum foam collapsed in on itself. Energy readings spiked and then flatlined. The generator exploded. Not just exploded. The generator was unmade. It stopped existing. Where there had been a machine the size of a small moon, there was now nothing. Not even debris. The void tide had touched it, and it had simply ceased to be. The star system around the generator went dark. Another piece of the universe, gone forever. In the command center, no one spoke. They had spent 8 months building that generator. They had given everything they had. And it had failed in 4 seconds. Yara stared at the empty readings on her screen. She felt like she might vomit. She felt like she might cry. She felt like she might lie down on the floor and never get up again. Instead, she stood up and walked to her office. She did not sleep for 4 days. She went through every piece of data from those 4 seconds. She ran simulations. She rebuilt her equations from the beginning. And on the 4th day, she found the error, a resonance frequency. She had miscalculated how the quantum foam would vibrate when it encountered the tide. The vibration had grown too strong, too fast, and it had torn the membrane apart from the inside. She sent the correction to her team. They did not ask questions. They did not complain. They simply started building the second generator. This time, they built it faster. They had learned from the first one. They knew which parts worked and which parts needed to be redesigned. What had taken 3 months before now took 3 weeks. The second generator was deployed at a different location. Once again, Yara gave the order to activate. The membrane formed. The quantum foam held together. The generator did not explode for 6 seconds. Then, once again, the membrane failed. Once again, the generator was unmade. Once again, another piece of the universe disappeared forever. but 6 seconds was longer than 4 seconds. Progress. The Endurance Council was watching now. They had not believed the humans could even build one generator. Now the humans had built 2, and they were already working on a third. High Arbiter Velkan requested a meeting with the human delegation. The request surprised everyone. The council never met with young species. They considered it a waste of time. HFY Chun was chosen to represent humanity. She did not want to go. She did not have time for meetings. Every hour she spent talking was an hour she was not working. But the council had resources that humanity desperately needed. Ancient technologies. Scientific knowledge accumulated over millions of years. If Yara could convince them to help, it might make the difference between success and failure. She traveled to the Obsidian Rotunda in a fast ship. She did not shower. She did not change her clothes. She had not slept properly in months, and she looked like it. The council chamber was vast and dark. The 12 elder beings sat in their places like statues. Yara felt very small standing before them. Very young. Very human. Velkan spoke first. You are attempting to deceive the universe itself. You wish to offer false reality instead of true reality. Yara nodded. Yes, the universe is not easily fooled. No, but it doesn't have to be fooled forever. Just delayed. Just long enough for the tide to exhaust itself or for us to find another solution. Your first 2 attempts have failed. Yes, but each failure teaches us something. The second generator lasted longer than the first. The third will last longer than the second. Velkan was silent for a moment. Crystal light moved through the Arbiter's body like slow thoughts. You have very little time, Velkan finally said. I know, Yara replied. That's why I should get back to work. She turned and walked out of the chamber. She did not wait to be dismissed. She did not have time for proper manners. Behind her, the council members looked at each other. In 200,000 years, no one had ever walked out on High Arbiter Velkan before. The third generator held for 6 hours before failing. The fourth generator held for 2 days. The fifth generator incorporated suggestions from the same Morth physicist who had sent Yara that mocking laughter 8 months ago. The physicist had changed her mind. She had watched the humans refuse to give up. And she had started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they might be on to something. The fifth generator held for a week. By month 14, there were 37 generators forming a thin membrane across 12 light years of space. It was the largest structure ever built by any species. It was holding, barely, but it was not enough. The membrane was too small. The void tide would simply flow around it and continue eating the universe from the other side. To truly stop the tide, the membrane would need to cover the entire arm of the galaxy. That was impossible. There were not enough materials. There were not enough workers. There was not enough time. Why, I looked at the numbers and felt despair creeping into her heart. They had come so far. They had done the impossible. But it was not enough. It would never be enough. The change began quietly. It started with small things that no one noticed at first. A crystalline architect emerged from temporal stasis. This had never happened before in the entire history of their species. Once a crystalline architect sealed themselves away from time, they never came back. The universe would end before they woke up. That was the whole point. But this architect had been watching the humans before going into stasis. She had seen their desperate work, their refusal to surrender. And as she floated in frozen time, a strange thought had come to her. What if they succeed? She would miss it. She would sleep through the greatest achievement in galactic history. She would wake up millions of years from now, and everyone would tell her about the humans who had saved the universe while she hid in her cocoon of stop time. So she woke up. She traveled to Luna Base. She found Yara Chun. I'm an architect, she said. Her voice was like glass bells ringing. I have designed structures larger than star systems. I can help. Yara stared at her for a long moment. Then she handed the architect a datapad with the membrane specifications. We need to make it bigger, Yara said. Much bigger. Can you do that? The architect studied the designs. These are inefficient. You are using too much material in the wrong places. I can redesign them to be stronger and lighter. How much stronger? 3 times. Maybe 4. For the first time in months, Yara smiled. The hegemony of suns was next. They had flown their war fleet into the void tide 14 months ago, determined to die as warriors. Most of them had died. Their ships had been unmade like everything else the tide touched, but some had survived. A small group of ships had hung back just far enough to watch what happened. They had gathered data. They had recorded everything they could about how the tide moved, how it consumed, how it behaved. Then they had limped back to civilized space with damaged ships and broken spirits. They found humanity still working, still building, still refusing to give up. The hegemony commander was a massive being covered in scales and scars. He had fought in 100 wars. He had killed enemies with his bare hands. He had never been afraid of anything. But watching the humans work, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt ashamed that he had chosen death. These tiny, fragile creatures had chosen to fight. And they were still fighting, even though every expert in the galaxy said they could not win. We have data, the commander said to Yara. From inside the tide, it may be useful. Yara took the data. She studied it through the night. The next morning, she made 17 adjustments to the membrane design based on what she had learned. The generators became 30% more effective. The Morith were next. They had been singing their final songs for 14 months. Beautiful, sad melodies that echoed through the water of their homeworlds. Songs of acceptance. Songs of farewell. But somewhere in the middle of their songs, something changed. The melody shifted. The rhythm quickened. The words transformed. They stopped singing about endings. They started singing about beginnings, work songs, ancient melodies from long ago, when the Morith had first learned to build things. Songs to coordinate labor. Songs to keep workers motivated. Songs to remind everyone that they were part of something larger than themselves. Millions of Morith stopped preparing for death and started preparing to work. Why? Yara asked when the first Morith scientists arrived at Luna Base. Your people said my idea was stupid. You sent me a recording of you laughing at me. The Morith physicist who had sent that recording wrapped 3 of her tentacles around herself in a gesture of embarrassment. We were wrong, she said. Your idea may still fail. The odds are still very bad. But you have shown us something we had forgotten. What? That trying is better than not trying. That hope is a choice, not a calculation. We had grown old and tired. We had forgotten what it felt like to fight for something. She extended another tentacle toward the design specifications. Now, show me where I can help. By month 16, 37 different species were working on the SCAP protocol. Ancient enemies were laboring side by side. Species that had not spoken in 10,000 years were sharing scientific data. The galaxy was coming together in a way it never had before. High Arbiter Velkan called another meeting of the Endurance Council. This time, the chamber was not quiet and dark. It was filled with light and noise. Representatives from 100 worlds were present, all of them demanding to be part of the project. This is unprecedented, said one council member. We have maintained order in the galaxy for 9 million years. We have never seen anything like this. The humans have changed something, said another. They have reminded us of what we used to be. before we grew old, before we learned to accept defeat. Velkan listened to the arguments. The ancient being had lived for 200,000 years. In all that time, Velkan had never made a decision based on hope, logic, reason, probability. These were the tools of wisdom. But watching the humans work, watching other species join them, watching the galaxy come alive with purpose for the first time in millions of years, Velkan began to understand something. Sometimes hope was not about probability. Sometimes hope was about choice. Sometimes you fought, not because you thought you would win, but because fighting was better than surrendering. The Council will contribute its resources to the SCAB protocol, Velkan announced. Our ancient technologies, our hidden knowledge, everything we have. The chamber erupted in cheers. Species that had been prepared to die were now prepared to fight. The impossible project suddenly seemed a little less impossible. On Luna Base, Yara Chun received the news. For a moment, she did not react. She was too tired to react. Her body was failing. Her hands never stopped shaking. Her heart beat irregularly from too many stimulants. But deep inside, in a place she had almost forgotten existed, something warm began to glow. They had a chance now. A real chance. She went back to work. There were only 2 months left. Month 17. The membrane stretched across 400 light years. It was made of quantum foam, held together by 12,000 generators built by 100 different species. Each generator was the size of a small moon. Together, they formed the largest structure ever created in the history of the galaxy. Yara Chun stood in the command center of Luna Base. She was 51 years old now. She looked much older. Her hair had gone completely gray. Her face was lined with exhaustion. Her hands trembled constantly, and she had to hold them together to keep them still. Around her, thousands of workers monitored screens and adjusted systems. The room was quiet. Everyone knew what was about to happen. The void tide had reached the boundary. On the main display, Yara could see it. A wall of darkness that stretched across the visible universe. Stars were disappearing into it like lights being switched off. Each star represented millions of worlds, billions of lives, all being unmade in an instant. And standing against that darkness was the membrane. A thin film of artificial reality designed to be eaten. Designed to sacrifice itself so that everything behind it could survive. All generators are active, reported a technician. Membrane integrity at 94%. Yara nodded. 94% was good. Better than she had hoped. But would it be enough? The tide touched the membrane. For a long, terrible moment, nothing seemed to happen. The darkness pressed against the artificial reality. The generators strained under the load. Warning lights began to flash across every screen. Then things started to go wrong. Generator 7 failed. Its section of the membrane collapsed, and the tide poured through like water through a broken dam. Automated systems rerouted power from nearby generators to seal the gap, but the strain caused Generator 12 to overload. "We're losing integrity," shouted a technician. 78%. 65%. Yara gripped the edge of her console. Her knuckles turned white. All around her, people were shouting, running, trying to patch holes in a wall that was crumbling faster than they could repair it. This was it. This was failure. 18 months of work, and they had only bought the universe a few extra seconds. Then something unexpected happened. The tide slowed not by much. Just a little. Just enough to notice. The darkness was still consuming the membrane, still eating through the quantum foam, but it was doing so more slowly than the calculations had predicted. What's happening? Someone asked why. R.A. stared at the data. Her exhausted mind struggled to understand, and then she saw it. The membrane was not just being destroyed. It was being absorbed. The tide was not simply unmaking the artificial reality. It was digesting it, processing it. And that process took time. The scab protocol was working. Not perfectly. Not as well as she had hoped. But it was working. Reroute power to the intact generators, Yara ordered. Concentrate the membrane. We don't need to cover the whole boundary anymore. We just need to keep enough intact to slow it down. Her team scrambled to obey. Generators shifted position. The membrane contracted, becoming denser, stronger. The tide pushed against it, hungry and relentless. But the feast it was being offered was rich and satisfying. The darkness slowed further. Hours passed. The membrane continued to burn away, but slowly. So slowly. The tide consumed it piece by piece, and for each piece it consumed, the universe behind the membrane remained safe. 1 day passed. Then 2. Then a week. The calculations came in. Yara read them 3 times to make sure she understood. At its current rate of consumption, the void tide would take 73 years to eat through the membrane. 73 years before it reached the core worlds. 73 years of time. They had not stopped the end of the universe. They had not defeated the void tide. They had simply delayed it. Pushed it back. Bought time that no one had thought could be bought. 73 years. It was not forever. It was not even a long time in galactic terms. But it was time. Time to research. Time to innovate. Time to find a better solution. Time for children to grow up and have children of their own. Time for scientists to study and learn. Time for the galaxy to live. High Arbiter Velkan made the announcement. The ancient being's crystalline voice carried across every frequency, every system, every inhabited world. There was something different in that voice now. Something that had not been there before. The Endurance Council declared, "Brace for the worst," Velkan said. One species did not brace. They built. And because they built, we survive. Across the galaxy, beings who had prepared themselves for death now looked up at their skies with new eyes. The darkness was still out there. The tide was still hungry. But there was light between them and the end. There was time. On Lunabase, celebrations erupted. Workers who had not rested in months collapsed into each other's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. Species that had been strangers 18 months ago now embraced like family. Why? Our Chun did not celebrate. She did not have the energy. Her body had given everything it had, and there was nothing left. She walked slowly to her office. The room was small and cluttered with datapads and empty coffee cups. On her desk, her computer displayed the equations she had written 18 months ago. The first draft of the scab protocol. She sat down in her chair. Her hands were shaking too badly to type, but that was okay. She did not need to type anything right now. She had given the galaxy time. 73 years. It was not enough, but it was a start. Now other scientists would continue her work. They would improve the membrane. They would find new solutions. They would keep fighting, because that was what the galaxy had learned from humanity. You did not give up. You did not accept the impossible. You kept fighting, even when the odds were against you, even when everyone said you could not win. Yara closed her eyes. For the first time in 18 months, she allowed herself to rest. Outside her window, the earth hung in the black sky. 7 billion people lived on that blue marble. They were alive. Their children would be alive. Their grandchildren would be alive, because one woman had refused to accept that the universe was ending. Because one woman had looked at the darkness and said, "No, not today." The memorial would be built later. A great station at the site of the first successful generator, where scientists from 100 worlds would work to improve the scab protocol. They would call it the Chun Memorial Research Station, but Yar would not see it. She was already asleep, her gray head resting on her desk, her tired body finally at peace. She had done her part. Now it was time for the galaxy to do the rest. And somewhere in the darkness, the Void Tide continued to eat, slowly, patiently, hungrily, but not hungrily enough, not anymore.